Now, just for full transparency, I don't actually hate Wonder Woman 1984, I just didn't love it like I hoped I would, and I was ultimately very disappointed by it. I loved the first Wonder Woman and thought Patty Jenkins did a stellar job with that movie, so I was obviously excited for the sequel. I think one thing that really dampened my excitement, though, was the fact that the movie got delayed for a while because of the pandemic, but I was still looking forward to it regardless. And when I watched it, I thought the movie was just fine, and that's kind of the problem. I didn't think the movie was necessarily terrible in any way, it's just that it didn't have a super strong story like the first one did. The movie had some great visuals, and I really dug the 1980s vibe that the film was going for. I still thought there were some pretty exciting action sequences, but none that were as epic as the first movie. I still thought Gal Gadot did a great job as Diana Prince, Pedro Pascal was a lot of fun as the villain Maxwell Lord. Kristen Wiig's character was enjoyable in kind of a silly way, but I kind of felt like they did him dirty with his arc and how he was brought back. I understand what the writers were going for, but I feel like it didn't pan out quite as well as it should have. The movie also felt kind of long, and I don't have a problem with long movies as long as they're well paced, but Wonder Woman 1984 just wasn't as engaging as the first one. Not a terrible movie, but just one that I was very let down by. I haven't had the urge to rewatch it since I first saw it back in 2020, which is saying something considering how much I enjoyed the first one. Maybe if I rewatched it, I might find some things to appreciate that I didn't initially connect with. But overall, Wonder Woman 1984 is a movie that I would call a semi-misfire that had some fun moments and decent ideas, but was disappointing in execution, unfortunately. Although that post-credit scene with Linda Carter was a nice touch. It's a shame that it's no longer going anywhere now that the DC Extended Universe has concluded.
Oh goody, the very movie that began the avalanche of the DCEU's downfall. Batman v Superman, for a good reason, is a movie that people are very divided on, because this is either a movie that you love so much or a movie that you just despise with a flaming passion. For me personally, this is a movie that I have tried to like for like the better part of 8 years. I really have wanted to like this movie for the longest time, but I still fucking hate it. Now, before I start tearing this movie to shreds again, I will start with the positives. The film has some concepts that are very interesting. The cinematography and the visuals look spectacular. You have Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman, who made such a great new addition to the movie, which eventually led to her own solo movie, Wonder Woman the Year After, which is one of my favorite comic book movies. And the fight scenes are badass, especially that warehouse sequence, which is arguably the greatest Batman action scenes of all time. However, this film has so many aspects and concepts that are so unjustifiably stupid. Why, you ask? Well, for starters, the entire structure of the film is completely sloppy. It's just too long. It's filled with so many convoluted plot lines, and the dialogue is just downright corny. And please, for fuck's sake, don't even get me started with Jesse Eisenberg's portrayal of Lex Luthor. Now, nothing against Eisenberg. He's a pretty fun actor who has done some phenomenal work in movies like The Social Network. But out of all actors, why the hell did they casted Jesse fucking Eisenberg? They could have casted so many actors that come to mind, rather if it's Mark Strong or Billy Zane, especially Billy Zane, because he's like the one actor people have been campaigning to play the character of Lex Luthor for like the better part of like 10 years. Eisenberg is just atrociously awful as Lex Luthor because he's nothing like the character from the comics, because he just doesn't come off like a credible threat. When you have a bad guy or a villain in your movie, they should always come off intimidating. Like if I saw you in an alleyway, I should be threatened by you. I was never threatened by Eisenberg's Lex Luthor at all, because he came off so annoying, like that spoiled rich kid in high school who was just way over his head. If they had him casted as the Riddler, he would have been phenomenal in that part, but as Lex Luthor, no, he was just god-awful. You have the silly third act with the Doomsday Monster, who was just completely shoehorned, because I guess all third acts in every single comic book movie needs that, I suppose. Not to mention that Superman's death just feels so cheesy as hell, because it's like, it just makes no sense, because the way it just feels so unearned. And all of a sudden, once he dies, he's now the beloved hero that everybody initially hated. It's like, it just makes no sense to me at all. I can't help but feel terribly sorry for Henry Cavill and Ben Affleck. Both of them are great actors, and I feel like if they were given the right material, both of them would have gone on to be the best actors to play both Batman and Superman. But with a combination of shitty writing and being utterly screwed by Warner Brothers is why all that potential for both of them were just completely flushed down the toilet. And both of them deserved better than the god-awful material that they were giving for in this movie. Overall, Batman v Superman could have had so much potential to be great, but I just find it to be such a miserable experience, as it essentially killed off the DCU's chances before it got started.
Okay, so for my next entry, we are taking a blast to the past. Well, maybe blast is the wrong word for this entry, depending on who you ask. Now again, just like Wonder Woman 1984, I don't hate Batman Forever, but oh boy, this movie was something else. Now, I understand that Tim Burton's Batman movies are definitely dated by today's standards for superhero films, but I still enjoy those movies for what they are. I find them to be fun in a somewhat campy way. They came out during a time when superhero movies were still in its testing the waters kind of phase, and despite being dated, the movies are still enjoyed by the generation that grew up with them. Although the enjoyment for Batman Forever varies depending on who you ask. Batman Forever just really sucked out a lot of what made Batman and Batman Returns so enjoyable. Even if Tim Burton's Batman movies aren't your cup of tea, you can still see that Tim Burton put a lot of heart into what he had made and had a lot of respect for the character of Batman. But when Joel Schumacher stepped up to direct the third movie, that was when the franchise started going downhill. I think first off, having Val Kilmer replace Michael Keaton was a big misstep. There's nothing egregiously wrong with Val Kilmer's performance, but there's also nothing really great about it. He's just very meh as Batman. He's decent as Bruce Wayne, but I don't think that's enough to really save it, unfortunately. Chris O'Donnell is introduced as Robin, and again, he's fine, but there's not a lot for him to really work with, which is a shame because Chris O'Donnell is actually a very good actor in other movies. We also have a huge downgrade in villains with Two-Face and the Riddler. The writing for their characters just feels very lazy and generic. They don't have much going for them in terms of a motivation. The script kind of just portrays them as people who are criminally insane just for the sake of it. I think Tommy Lee Jones is a great actor, but he was not given a script that works with his strengths as an actor. They tried to make Two-Face a campy villain, which doesn't really suit the character very well. Now, for Jim Carrey as the Riddler, the campiness kind of works in a very odd way. Jim Carrey's campy interpretation of the Riddler isn't entirely inaccurate to the character, but the story doesn't give him much to justify it. I think there's still some enjoyable aspects to Batman Forever. It's an acquired taste, but Jim Carrey's performance as the Riddler can be fun. There's some decent ideas in the movie, but it's bogged down by its lack of cohesive story structure. Elliot Goldenthal's score is actually not bad at all. The movie can be enjoyable in kind of a campy way, but it's still a mess due to the story inconsistencies and poor execution of decent ideas. I can see having fun with parts of Batman Forever, but overall it was a huge decline in quality from its predecessors, and sadly, it only got worse with the next film.
Now, if you're looking for a comic book movie that is just absolutely dull and probably will put you to sleep, then look no further than Thor Love and Thunder, one of the worst movies of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Would I consider this movie to be terrible? I'm not sure about that, but it is just absolutely boring. This is a movie that really has nothing going for it. Besides like the Thor Loki dynamic, that's like the only good thing I can say about this film. Everything else, not so much. The first bad thing about this film is Malekith, who is just like the definition of a one-note villain with a very unintriguing revenge motivation, and when compared to the other films of the MCU, he would most definitely probably would be dead last on my list because he absolutely sucks. You also have a bunch of lame side characters, whether if it's Stellan Skarsgård or even Kat Dennings, and of course Natalie Portman as Jane Foster. Judging by her performance, Natalie Portman visibly just didn't give a shit. It looked like she'd rather be somewhere else, as she had been coerced into this film on the belief that Patty Jenkins would be the director. However, when Patty Jenkins was dropped from this movie, Natalie Portman didn't even want to come back. Her disappointment is crystal clear throughout the entire movie, as she gives one of the worst performances of her career. Would I consider Thor the Dark World the worst Thor movie? Oh no, I will get to that later. But yeah, it's undeniably one of the weakest entries in the MCU, and I will never ever watch it again.
Now, when I first saw Suicide Squad, I actually enjoyed it quite a bit, and I remember liking it more than I thought I would. But as time went on, I rewatched it multiple times, and every time I watched it, I only liked it less and less. I started to realize how sloppily executed the story was the more I rewatched it, and I also started to realize how taped together the story feels. The movie in a nutshell is about a group of supervillains who are assigned to do a government mission where they spend 2 hours walking and sharing backstories with each other, as well as having 2 really anticlimactic action sequences. 2! Now, is everything about Suicide Squad bad? No, of course not. The cast overwhelmingly is the best part. Will Smith did a great job as Floyd Lawton or Deadshot, and it's a shame we never got to see more of his character. Viola Davis, of course, is great as Amanda Waller. Margot Robbie easily gives the best performance in the movie with her very gripping debut as Harley Quinn, and her character is the only one that really had an arc with the future movies. Jay Hernandez was also pretty good as Diablo. The soundtrack to the movie was obviously great as well. The huge issue with Suicide Squad is that Warner Brothers actually forced David Ayer to rush the film's production just so they could start shooting the trailer. David Ayer was only given 6 weeks to finish the script, and even though he asked for more time, he was denied by the studio. The greediness of Warner Brothers is what really ticks me off here, because according to David Ayer, he intended to make a far better film but was screwed over by the studio. And even though the final result wasn't awful, it was still undercooked and left a lot to be desired. There were scenes in the trailer that got left out of the movie because of this. which is probably why Jared Leto's highly anticipated performance as the Joker felt so underwhelming given how little he was in the film. I love the sequel that was directed by James Gunn, but man, I just wish Warner Brothers didn't rush David Ayer and that they would have given him the creative freedom that they gave Gunn. I was hoping that after Zack Snyder's Justice League was released that DC would give David Ayer the green light to make the Ayer cut of Suicide Squad, but now that DC is taking a new trajectory with James Gunn's new DCU, I don't think the Ayer cut will ever see the light of day. I think the slightly improved extended cut of Suicide Squad is the best we'll ever get. What could have been?
In all honesty, and I'm not sure if this is exactly an unpopular opinion, but I never liked the Mark Webb Spider-Man movies. I know there's some people out there who are huge defenders of these two films, but I gotta be honest, I just felt like they were made just to appeal to all the people who didn't like the Sam Raimi Spider-Man iteration. While The Amazing Spider-Man from 2012 was, you know, it was okay enough for what it was, but it just felt like a lame rehash from the 2002 movie. And as for The Amazing Spider-Man 2, yikes. Ugh, what a shitty follow-up. Coming from a guy like me who has always been and always will be a Spider-Man fan, this is the one Spider-Man movie that I just genuinely do not like at all, as it feels like a movie that just struggles so hard for what it wants to be, as it has too many things going on for me to even really care at all. It features 3 shitty villains in Jamie Foxx's Electro, Dandy Han, who looks absolutely hideous as the Green Goblin, and to a lesser extent, Paul Giamatti's Rhino, but yet none of them stand out at all because they all felt like they just got shoehorned into this movie. Instead of telling a cohesive story, the biggest crime that this movie commits is focusing more on establishing future films. As you can see that this movie is just filled with references of the Sinister Six, which led to so many actors being wasted, such as Felicity Jones as Felicia Hardy, and most notably Shailene Woodley as Mary Jane Watson, who was infamously cut from this film. It was not even featured in the deleted scenes, which makes no fucking sense, because what was the point of casting her in this film only to completely remove all of her scenes? Like, seriously, like, what? Overall, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is a movie that is just nothing but a clunky and overstuffed hot mess that is just overstuffed with so much wasted potential, filled with shitty villains that just serve no purpose, which led to so many future sequels being canceled, and thankfully so.
Morbius is not only one of the most clowned on superhero movies, but it's also one of the most memed movies of the 21st century. Now, I actually am somewhat of a defender of Morbius. I think the movie is overhated, and I don't think it's the total train wreck that people make it out to be, but it wasn't a great movie at all. Very much like other superhero movies, Morbius was actually based on a really intriguing premise, but got lost in its execution. I actually think that Jared Leto does a pretty good job as Michael Morbius and has a pretty intriguing origin story. Matt Smith is pretty charming as Lucian, who I thought made a semi-decent villain. Jared Harris is also pretty decent in the movie as well. The movie does have some pretty cool visuals and colors. There's an interesting vibe going on with the movie, and as previously stated, has a really intriguing premise. The problem with Morbius is that it was too short and didn't have enough time to accomplish anything grand as an origin story. This is the first movie in the Sony Spider-Man universe that wasn't a Venom movie. The Venom movies are definitely an acquired taste and have flaws, but I still enjoy them in a very niche way. Morbius just didn't have the same energy as those movies did. I felt like Morbius had a decent run through the first 2 acts, but as the 3rd act came along, the story was rushed, and it felt like there were some missing scenes that were left on the cutting room floor. That probably is the case given the film's many delays. I thought the movie opened up some interesting multiverse possibilities with Michael Keaton's Vulture appearing from the MCU, but it also begs a lot of logistical questions regarding the multiverse, and it just feels like a failed attempt to set up a Sinister Six lineup. The best way I can describe my opinion on Morbius is that it kind of feels like a 2-parter TV pilot crammed into a movie for what could have been a potentially good show. The movie gets you intrigued, you want to see where the story goes, but you won't be able to know until the next episode comes out. Although now that the Sony Spider-Man universe has been axed, I highly doubt that we'll see any kind of story continuation for what could have been a decent Sinister Six lineup. Sony really just needs to let Disney take control of Spider-Man projects from here on out, because outside of the phenomenal Spider-Verse movies, they've been striking out pretty hard recently. Although Morbius looks pretty good next to the movies that Sony put out after it. Ugh, Sony.
Hooray, I have to talk about X-Men Dark Phoenix. Yet again, another incredibly boring comic book movie. The only redeeming quality about this movie is the train sequence. Everything else sucks. sucks. With Dark Phoenix being the final entry of the Fox X-Men movie franchise, it was meant to be the second attempt to make a movie of the iconic Dark Phoenix storyline saga, and doing it right this time by sending off the entire franchise on a high note. It's no secret that the X-Men films have been a hit or miss since the series debuted in 2000, but after the monster hit that was Logan in 2017, the much delayed Dark Phoenix effectively ended the franchise on such a shitty low by not learning nothing from the mistakes of X-Men The Last Stand and making a film out of obligation rather than passion of the source material. The utter lack of emotion that I felt throughout this entire film was at an all-time high because the only two actors that really stood out to me was James McAvoy as Professor X and Michael Fassbender as Magneto. Every other actor is just clearly phoning it in, as you could just tell that they just didn't give a shit at that point and looked like they were just there for a paycheck, most obviously being Jennifer Lawrence as Mystique, who was forced into this movie and was clearly eager to get her death scene over and done with, as she clearly had enough of suffering through the hours of the makeup process, which is understandable, but at the same time, if you don't give a shit, why should I give a shit? Oh yeah, and I can't forget to mention that she says this incredibly stupid movie line that even to this day still makes me cringe.
I can't actually remember the last time you were the one risking something. And by the way, the women are always saving the men around here. You might want to think about changing the name to X-Women.
And poor Jessica Chastain was completely wasted in this film playing such an incredibly boring villain, as even Chastain herself has expressed how much she's distanced herself from this movie, expressing her frustration during the film's production. And on top of that, she didn't even know her character's name until the day Dark Phoenix premiered in theaters, which is honestly just insane. Overall, X-Men Dark Phoenix is such an absolute bore fest of a movie that feels so rushed, so tasteless, and it was such a pathetic way for the entire X-Men Fox franchise to go out after nearly 2 pissing decades.
X-Men Origins is one of those movies that was so controversial when it came out that it would actually be a crime to not mention it on this list. Now, on paper, the idea of X-Men Origins is actually really good. Wolverine is a fan-favorite character explored very well in Bryan Singer's X-Men trilogy, and cast perfectly by the man, the myth, the legend himself, Hugh Jackman. So, his origin story should have been a great one, right? Wrong! Now, there are elements to this movie that I actually do like. Some of the ideas behind how Logan became Wolverine are actually really interesting, but it's so bogged down by the campiness and the completely over-the-top action sequences. Hugh Jackman is naturally great as the character, so I like him in the movie, and Liev Schreiber is pretty good as Sabretooth. But the movie has so much going on and moves so fast that it doesn't give the stories any time to truly feel fleshed out. They completely underutilized fan-favorite characters like Ryan Reynolds as Deadpool, and Jared Padalecki is sadly wasted as Gambit. I also can't talk about this movie without mentioning the Blob, what? It also frustrates me how this movie has 2 post-credit scenes that were not shown together. Fox aired the 2 of them separately in different theaters. What were they thinking? This isn't Clue the movie, this is the origin story of Wolverine. Not to mention that the movie was actually leaked online in its entirety a week before the film was released. And you're telling me that even the film pirates didn't see everything? There were also logical inconsistencies that the future movies had to retcon using time travel. X-Men Origins Wolverine can be enjoyed in a somewhat LOL what the hell did I just watch kind of way. It is kind of hilarious how bad the movie is, but it can also be utterly insulting how badly they screwed up Wolverine's origin story due to poor execution of good ideas, and some bad ideas sprinkled in as well. I will say though, at the very least Fox got their game together and made up for this mess by A, delivering with 2 sequels in James Mangold's The Wolverine and Logan, B, fixing the inconsistencies in First Class and Days of Future Past, and C, giving Ryan Reynolds a second chance as Deadpool. Other than that, this movie is, to quote Chris Stuckman, a hilariosity.
Oh dear me, where do I begin with this fucking abomination? Now on paper, the 2015 iteration of Fantastic Four, or better known as Fant4stic, really should have not been the failure that it was, because it looked like it had all the materials to become a great superhero movie, especially when it featured a cast full of incredibly talented actors such as Miles Teller, Michael B. Jordan, Jamie Bell, and even Kate Mara. It's a movie that really seemed like it had all the right materials to be good. However, the execution of it all was beyond atrocious. It's so bad that hell, even the director himself, Josh Trank, publicly disowned it before the day it was even released. You can't make this shit up. When you have a director who publicly distances himself from a movie he just made just when it's about to be released, that's how you know you're in for a shit show. Merely everything about Fant4stic just sucks on so many levels. It lacks charm, humor, the pacing is so drabby, horrible action scenes as they lack emotional weight or depth, and the chemistry between the 4 characters are so poor, mainly due to the fact that it was undercut by a muddled script and various reshoots that visibly altered the tone and the plot of the movie halfway through. And the worst of all, the way they completely bastardized Doctor Doom, who's one of the most iconic Marvel villains of all time, relegated to being such a dull villain. Like, how do you manage to fuck up Doctor Doom? Fantastic is a movie that looked very promising upon release, but unfortunately it became a cautionary tale of what happens when a comic book adaptation forgets the tone and the heart that made the source beloved in the first place, and overall just feels like a complete misfire of a film that just sucked on so many levels.
After Sony kicked off the Spider-Man-less universe with 2 niche but still kind of fun Venom movies and a very underwhelming Morbius film, surely Sony was going to learn from their mistakes and finally start incorporating Spider-Man into their universe, right? Wrong again. Okay, well, they kinda did, but not in a good way. The movie pretty much feels like a 2-hour trailer for a universe that was supposed to eventually have Spider-Man in it without making Spider-Man a top priority. There's less than 5 minutes of action in the whole movie. Let that sink in for a moment. Less than 5 minutes of action in a superhero movie. And when there was action, it wasn't good. It wasn't exciting, it was poorly edited, and what was up with all the Pepsi product placements in this movie? Like, what? And it really saddens me because I'm all for having a Spider-Woman movie. What Sony did with Gwen in Spider-Verse is awesome. So how Sony managed to fumble the first Spider-Woman movie this badly is just beyond me. The acting in this movie is fine, there's nothing egregiously wrong with it, but you can tell in several scenes that the actors just wanted to get through the scene, so to speak. Which is a shame because the actors in the movie are actually decent actors in other films and shows that they've been in. There's also elements about the plot that don't make any sense, because the story was not handled carefully whatsoever. We have a really forgettable and bland villain in Ezekiel, but the thing that frustrates me the most about Madam Web is that at its core, the script actually has a rather intriguing premise. The premise of Madam Web is one that could have made a good movie had the writers actually done something with it. The best way to describe this mess of a story is that it feels like a prequel to what could have been a decent Spider-Woman movie. But instead, we got a bland, poorly executed, at times nonsensical movie that was nearly actionless and overall was the exact opposite of what it should have been. Ugh, Sony, why can't you just give us a good Spider-Woman movie?
Do I really have to explain how utterly shitty Superman Quest for Peace is? Not only is this widely considered one of the worst movies in the superhero genre, one of the worst movies of all time, and for good reason. Hell, even the late Christopher Reeves himself described this movie as a catastrophe from start to finish. And honestly, he couldn't have said it better. Outside of maybe like a few solid performances, there's truly nothing redeemable about Superman Quest for Peace in the slightest. It has an incredibly weak plot, a shitty script, god-awful CGI, and a laughably shitty villain in the form of Nuclear Man. Like, really? Nuclear Man? I mean, it was already bad enough that the Christopher Reeve Superman franchise was already going on a downward spiral, especially with the releases of Superman 3 and even the Supergirl movie that was released the year after that. But with this being the 4th and final entry of the Superman franchise, it pretty much put a nail in the coffin by killing it dead. It was such a real shame and so heartbreaking that Christopher Reeve's time as Superman came to such a disappointing conclusion, because knowing how much the character meant to the actor, whom was so utterly beloved for his performance as Clark Kent and his heroic alter ego, he deserved a far better send-off than the one he got in Superman 4 The Quest for Peace, which is genuinely an utter disgrace to the Man of Steel.
If you told me after Madam Web came out that the Sony Spider-Man-less universe could get worse, I honestly would not have believed you. Now, Kraven the Hunter was a movie that I was semi-optimistic about because Kraven is a beloved Spider-Man villain, and it was the first R-rated movie in this universe. And after how well Marvel handled the Deadpool trilogy and Logan, I actually had faith that it would be decent. I could not have been more wrong. There's really not much going for Kraven, and that sucks. Because the first 40 minutes or so of the movie I actually thought was somewhat decent. I thought that it set up the movie in an intriguing way and had an interesting premise. And then the movie was just a bland, mind-numbing, generically embarrassing comic book movie. I mean, how did Sony mess this one up worse than Morbius and Madam Web? The main issue with Kraven the Hunter is that there's really nothing interesting or exciting about the movie at all. All of the actors just feel like they showed up to get paid and leave. The action sequences were bland, and the CGI and editing was unforgivably bad. I wasn't even necessarily bored during Kraven the Hunter, I was just in a state of numbness. I was paying attention the whole time, but I was never enjoying it. I thought that Aaron Taylor Johnson had some funny moments every now and again. Russell Crowe was charming at times. There were some cool visuals with Kraven, especially during the snow sequences. The costume and overall vibe that Aaron Taylor Johnson had was pretty cool. But outside of that, Sony managed to make the most forgettably unexciting R-rated comic book movie I've ever seen. I was so frustrated by how poorly done the movie was. But here's the weird thing. Despite how bad the movie is, there were some moments that were so unbelievably bad that it was actually kind of funny how bad the movie was. I thought the movie was incredibly dull, but I couldn't help but laugh at certain parts with how bizarre the movie was. But yeah, Sony, what were you thinking with this movie, man? I should have been more skeptical when I saw that the film got delayed for over a year just on a whim. I don't know, man. I'm just glad that we're finally moving beyond the Sony Spider-Man universe, because outside of the potential Sinister Six possibilities and the fun enough Venom trilogy, this universe was a mess with not much going for it. Hopefully Sony just worries about Tom Holland's Spider-Man and the Spider-Verse going forward.
Now, I know that it's a massive cliche to completely rag on the 2017 iteration of Justice League directed by Joss Whedon, which is kind of like the equivalent of me putting a bullet through a dead body at this point. But this, in all honesty, really should be my number one. Joss Whedon's Justice League, or universally known as Justice League, is not only an embarrassment to comic book movies, but to movies in general. The fact that this is a movie that exists is just absolutely criminal because it feels like an absolute Frankenstein's monster that is such a complete and utter shitfest. Now, it's been well documented that this is a film that went through a ton of problems during production, from executive meddling, from a shit ton of reshoots, and switching directors, with Zack Snyder stepping down at the expense for Joss Whedon, which in all honesty didn't really seem like a bad idea, but in hindsight, it was. The reshoots in this film is so obvious, as Zack Snyder's grim and gritty tone is completely thrown out the window with Joss Whedon's lighthearted MCU-like tone, which features comedy that is just utterly atrocious, and also the terrible computer-generated imagery, with the most notable example being Superman's extremely creepy CGI mouth, mainly due to the fact that Henry Cavill was filming Mission Impossible Fallout, while the reshoots for Justice League were happening during the same time period. Paramount Studios wouldn't allow Cavill to shave his mustache for Mission Impossible, which led Warner Brothers to digitally remove Cavill's mustache during Justice League, and this is the result that we got.
Holy Jesus. What is that? What the fuck is that?
Now, granted, the DCU was already going through a rough patch with the releases of Batman v Superman and Suicide Squad serving as huge disappointments, but after watching the 2017 Wonder Woman movie, I remember thinking to myself, this is the DCU's chance to finally get on the right track, and I thought they were going to continue that momentum with Justice League, only for my high hopes to be completely crushed, as this movie just served as an absolute shitfest with poorly developed characters and a story that just feel like such an absolute bloated mess.
And here we are. We have arrived at the king of all bad comic book movies, in my humble opinion. Now, the original 4 Batman movies, as I've said, are definitely an acquired taste, but there's still a massive decline in quality as the series goes on. I still really enjoy Tim Burton's first 2 movies, even with some of their flaws and datedness. I think that for their time, they were revolutionary for the comic book movie genre and can still be enjoyed in a very fun way. Batman Forever is not the worst movie, but there's still so much that could have been better. But Batman and Robin... oh boy, this movie is just levels of bad. Everything from the completely over-the-top campy tone and acting to the story that makes no sense to just everything. Every actor in this movie is bad. And that's saying something considering that they've all done phenomenal work. George Clooney is a great actor and also a good director, and for all intents and purposes, he actually probably would have made a good Bruce Wayne and a decent Batman. But he was cast in a movie that did his acting chops no justice. This film pretty much killed Chris O'Donnell's career, which is a shame considering he had some pretty promising performances early on in his career with films like Scent of a Woman. How did Uma Thurman go from Oscar-nominated as Mia Wallace in Pulp Fiction to being completely over the top as Poison Ivy? At least she got to be the bride in Kill Bill after the fact. Arnold Schwarzenegger was the freaking Terminator, and he got demoted to doing one-liners as Mr. Freeze. And God bless Alicia Silverstone, she's iconic as Cher Horowitz in Clueless, but she was done no favors as Batgirl. Even the props are too campy, which leads to the overall problem with the movie. Every single costume and set piece were actually designed to be toys. The props and the costumes were designed before the movie actually went into production in order to make kids' toys for the film, which means that this entire film was just a gigantic commercial for toys. What was Joel Schumacher thinking? Don't even get me started on all the logical inconsistencies. Just don't. It's also insane how much apologizing both Clooney and Schumacher did to try and justify this movie.
If there's anybody watching this that, let's say, loved Batman Forever and went into Batman and Robin with great anticipation, if I disappointed them in any way, then I really want to apologize, because it wasn't my intention. My intention was just to entertain them.
I don't actually fault any of the actors for being terrible in this movie, because they were all cast in a massive misfire of a movie. I will, however, give credit to one aspect of Batman and Robin, and that's the fact that had the franchise not fallen so far from grace, Christopher Nolan probably would have never rebooted the franchise with his Dark Knight trilogy, which got the character of Batman so right. Outside of that, Batman and Robin is just a gigantic misfire of epic proportions, which is why it is my pick for my least favorite comic book movie ever made. But hey, at least it's a little funny how ridiculous the movie is.
For those of y'all who should know how I feel about Thor Love and Thunder, I'll pretty much just let Roger Ebert explain.
I hated this movie. Hated this movie. Hated it. Hated every simpering, stupid, vacant, audience-insulting moment of it.
I don't think it should be a surprise to some of y'all that Thor Love and Thunder was going to be at my top spot, because for the past 3 years since the film's release, I have been publicly outspoken of how much I detest Thor Love and Thunder. Everything about this movie's existence always makes my blood boil. Not only is this my least favorite comic book movie of all time, not just my least favorite MCU movie of all time, it's one of my least favorite movies of all time, period. Would I consider it to be the worst comic book movie ever? No, because I would argue that there have been much worse than this. But for me personally, for this to be the follow-up to Thor Ragnarok is just absolutely insane. For Taika Waititi to go from making the best Thor movie to the worst Thor movie is just like, I can't even put it to words. Like it's just so fucking unreal. Upon watching the trailers for Thor Love and Thunder in 2022, I had every reason to be excited to see this. It seems like after the success of Thor Love and Thunder, Taika Waititi was given all the creative freedom for whatever he wanted to do with Thor Love and Thunder, which also got me even more excited. So I was thinking, what could go wrong? Well, just about everything. Taika Waititi completely turning this movie into a shitty Saturday Night Live skit by playing everybody and everything in this movie as a complete joke. No thank you. Completely ruined the character of Thor by turning him into a colossal dumbass. No thank you. Casting acclaimed actors like Russell Crowe and Christian Bale as Gore the God Butcher, only to do little to nothing with both of them. No thank you. Also, I can't forget to mention the CGI. Dear God. The CGI looks like fucking shit. Like, seriously, what the hell is this? Like, what the hell is this shit? Hell, even Christian Bale himself has gone on publicly expressing that he didn't enjoy his time during the production of Thor Love and Thunder, as he stated that the people on the project were incredible to work with. He was very annoyed with the quote-unquote monotony of the heavy green screen during the film's production, which to me should speak volumes. And the fact that even Chris Hemsworth himself has gone on expressing that he felt like this movie was made by a 7-year-old should even speak more louder volumes. And the number one thing that makes this movie all the more frustrating is the fact that Taika Waititi has gone on record blatantly admitting that he never cared for the character of Thor and only joined the MCU for the money to feed his wife and his kids. Now look, on one hand, I fully respect Taika Waititi for his honesty, and I get it. As a father and as a husband, you'll do anything to feed your family. That's completely understandable, and I get it. But at the same time, what the hell was the point of you taking on this project if you never cared for the source material? Overall, Thor Love and Thunder is a movie that I absolutely detest with every ounce of my soul. A movie that just felt like nothing but a waste of my time, a waste of my money. It's unquestionably one of, if not the most embarrassing entry in the MCU, and I will never watch it again. But yeah, overall, Thor Love and Thunder is undoubtedly my least favorite comic book movie of all time.